are back with yet another edition of Simplified with me, Tanvi Shukla. A single piece of lemon right now in our country can cost you up to 10 rupees, perhaps more or maybe a little less. That's 5 times the usual price. 5 times. It's almost, the experience is almost like actually buying an avocado in a fancy supermarket. That's the amount that you're actually paying for this lemon or 1 kg of lemon. In fact, recently there was a news report that came that said that 750 kgs of lemons were reported from Kanpur, from the orchards in Kanpur, and this, by the way, was not the only such report that we got. There were multiple reports, especially from Uttar Pradesh, that came about lemons being stolen. That's how expensive they've become. Why? Well, to oversimplify it in a sense, inflation. Of course, when it comes to lemons, there are several other factors. There are factors about low production, lower supply than what is expected usually at this time in the market, climate change and soaring temperatures. But we're not just going to sit here and talk about the high prices of lemon. Enough has been said and written about it. Let's take a look at the larger picture. Almost everything that you are consuming, using as a product, good or a service today is more expensive than it was a few months ago. Almost everything, I say. But take a look at it. Your edible oils, your cooking oil essentially, your cooking gas, the petrol that you fill up, your tea, your coffee, your daily food essentials, most of your vegetables, most of your fruits are extremely expensive today versus what they were just a few months ago. This is essentially inflation, and inflation in the past 1 year, specifically more in the last few weeks, has become a big issue, not just for our country, but actually for the entire world. One of the reasons, of course, one of the key reasons right now, of course, is the Russian-Ukraine conflict, and thereby as a consequence, the soaring prices of crude oil, which impacts almost everything in our life. Today we are going to talk about inflation. We're going to talk about inflation right now. We're going to talk about inflation as a concept and why should it bother you and I. When you read those statistics in your newspaper headlines or on your television screens or your mobile app, what does that really mean? That's what we are going to talk about. But since I did mention prices going up, here are a few more examples. Refined oil, sunflower and soybean saw a rise of 10.7% just over the last month as supplies got disrupted because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Prices, in fact, for this oil, if you compare it over last year, are almost up 19 to 20%. Similarly, chicken prices have spiked up 20% just on a year-on-year basis from last year to this year, 13.2% just on a month-on-month basis. Let's look at one of the index that is often quoted, which is the wholesale price index, and the inflation which is based on this index. And that's the statistic that we have for the last 6 odd months. In September, it was 11.8%, gradually went up to November, which is the last high we saw of 14.23%, and now again for the month of March, we've come back after a bit of relief to 14.55%. By the way, since April last year up until now, for almost 12 consecutive months now, WPI inflation has stayed in double digits. Any expert will tell you that is a big problem. What our expert will tell us today is why is it a big problem? Here are the questions that we will be discussing today. Question number 1, what is causing the recent spike in prices? Will things actually get more expensive this year? We are already at such high levels, but can it get worse? We will then also get into the details of what is WPI and CPI inflation. There are 2 key index levels that we look at. How are they different? Why do we have 2 to begin with? That's also something that we will discuss today. And of course, we will also talk about the larger concept of inflation, and can it also at some point be good for an economy? Maybe not at these high levels, of course. So without wasting any more time, let me say hello and welcome to Dr Aruna Sharma, practitioner, developmental economist and former Secretary for Government of India, joining me right now. Thank you so much, Dr Sharma, for joining us in this conversation. Let's first talk about why are we seeing this global price surge, to put it in simple words?
See, as you have very rightly said, the main reason has been the Russia-Ukraine war, which came as a double whammy after the COVID slowdown in the businesses and the disruption which happened in the supply chains. So, all this put together is having an impact across the globe on inflation rates, and therefore you see a spike in the inflation rates all over the globe. So, these are the main reasons that is contributing. But then, having said that, I will say in other countries, they have a very strong social security protection measures. So the impact is reduced. Whereas in India, except for the fair price shops for the poorest of the poor, where we are giving now a 5 kg of food grains, that is the carbohydrates, we don't have strong social security measures. And therefore, the impact of this is more like a vicious cycle, and therefore it is multiplying quite a lot if you go about it. So there are external factors which are impacting it, and I will add on to it the internal factor because our taxation on fuel, and this I will say it emphatically because in difficult times, it is very important to set the priority that what is your priority? Your priority is to curtail the inflation. It is not just done by the fiscal measures or the economic prescriptions. It is very important to prioritize at what time you can reduce the taxation on a particular item, which will reduce the cascading effect and bring down the inflation. And fuel is the one point where our taxation is maximum across the globe, and there is a little leeway there where the central government excise duty is a major chunk where some relief can be given to bring down this uh, I must say, like geometric proportions in double digits, the inflation rate is going. And it is very, very important what you were rightly mentioning. It is year on year or month on month. So it is not being feeling happy that, okay, consumer price index is 6.07, 6.07 on the previous data that we had. So that kind of a jump it is happening, and that is affecting the pockets of everybody. And in India, after the COVID, after the loss of jobs, the service sector still struggling to come up. It is the K, the lower part of the K, and which is still struggling. And those who are in V, in the expansion terms, if inflation is there, then a loan will become very expensive. So that is how it is going to impact. So global factors are there, internal factors are there, which is affecting this inflation and will continue to affect the inflation.
Oh, you're absolutely right. In fact, I want to just quote a few more examples because this, usually what happens is we hear about petrol prices have been increased again, 50% hike in petrol price, another 30 paisa hike in diesel price, and 10 days straight hikes in petrol and diesel. But we're not able to grasp the overall impact of it, the actual reality of what these price hikes really mean. Actually, if you see, clothing and footwear inflation rose to a 11th straight month of 9.4%. So our clothes, our shoes, all kinds of footwear that we're buying have actually become more expensive. Household goods and services overall have seen an extreme steep rise in prices with an inflation to 7.7%, which means your utensils, your furniture and fixtures, your almirahs, dressing tables, all of that. So not just your food items, everything else in your home, if you recently bought any of that, would have been a lot more expensive. The most important though, and what hurts everybody, especially the poor and the lower middle class incomes, Dr. Aruna Sharma, is the food basket. And of course, fruits, vegetables, lemons like I spoke about, French beans, bindi, almost everything is a lot more expensive. What does that really mean when such an inflation takes place? How does that impact daily life and how people spend their money?
You are absolutely right, because the government has to prioritize their taxation to control the inflation. Besides financial thing which I said before, the individual cuts down on the out of pocket expenses. And where does it cut down? It cuts down on what they think as non-essentials. So if you look at the hunger rate of India, we are among the worst in the world. If you look at the malnutrition rate, we are worst in the world. So what is getting compromised in the inflation is the nutritious diet, a balanced diet. So that is getting hit. The people will cut down cereals, the people will cut down vegetables, the people will cut down high iron content vegetables. All this is going to happen impact, and what they will consume is only carbohydrates, that is wheat or rice. So, in a sense, the impact is going to be much more long term by hitting under 5 children, by hitting these adolescent girls, by hitting the pregnant women, and its impact is going to be there. If you talk to the medical experts, they say a harm done under 5 is lifelong. Irrespective of what doses we keep on giving them, what increase of thing. Uh, what increase we keep on giving them, this is going to hit them very, very badly. So the impact of the food basket, if you'll see, it is a bargain between filling the stomach, that is the carbohydrates, vis-a-vis the nutritional diet. And that is a real harmful kind of a bargain, or the preference which the people will go for because of this inflation, and that's where they will cut down, is going to be a negative impact to the national strength.
A negative impact to the national strength, which is why as it begins to impact our daily lives, as we change the way or what we eat and what we wear and what soap we use and what shampoo you use or tea and how many cups of tea or coffee do we drink every day, as that changes, it may also impact the overall economy and even the political system. Let's talk about inflation, in fact, for that matter. What is inflation essentially? It is rise in prices. When too much of it happens, we start calling it mehengai in our own terms. Mehengai, for most of us, comes along with a negative connotation, obviously. Governments have fallen, not just in India, governments have got into trouble. Globally, empires have crumbled in the last 300, 400 years that we've seen, when inflation has become a problem for the public. The economic growth has taken a beating when repeatedly, like Dr. Sharma was pointing out, governments and central banks also try to control inflation. Sometimes that comes at the cost of economic growth. In India, the Reserve Bank of India's one of key roles is actually to keep a check on inflation. And how do they do that? How do they decide on their policy? They look at various indicators. Two indicators that then come up are CPI and WPI. Dr. Sharma, can you help us understand wholesale price index and the consumer price index? How are they different, and what really should then me as a consumer look at?
See, if you look at consumer price index, as the word says, it is at the consumer end. How much out of pocket, how things are becoming more expensive at your end. And when you look at the wholesale price index, it is at producer's end, in the sense how much the raw materials are becoming more expensive for them to produce a product, which is anyway going to get passed on to the consumer price index. And therefore, what becomes more worrisome is the wholesale price index, when continuously it is increasing, because it is going to have a negative impact by increasing the inflation at the consumer level, the end person in the queue, who is going to ultimately pay for the escalation of the cost. You can see so in the steel prices, where the raw material has become, coking coal has become 3 times, the steel prices went up, the infrastructure cost goes up, the end the downstream people who buy those flats and add value to it, the cost goes up, and ultimately consumer ends up paying more. So this is the basic difference between the WPI and the CPI when we talk about. And therefore, it is very important that the worry starts off when the wholesale price index, and like you were rightly said, that month on month it is increasing in double digit. So from 13.11 in February, we are 14.55 in March. So this is going to, if this is going to increase, it is going to have a negative impact which cannot be curtailed at the consumer price index level. So it is 6.07 today, the increase is going to be there. And if you look at the figures, it was 6.18 in 2020. From there, we have come down to 6.07 now. So it may look that, okay, it may be a little fluctuation, but we forget that it is on that 6.18 increase that today it is 6.07. So this kind of a figure where it is to be curtailed within 6%, 4% is the attempt which any central bank does. This is going out of hand. This is going out of hand.
Yes, in fact, what you mentioned about the consumer price index, which is actually the a better reflection of the retail prices that we see of products that we use and services that we use. So CPI includes both goods and services as well. It's also an indicator that the central bank looks at first before they decide on the monetary policy, before they decide on interest rates, which of course affect you also, because that's what decides how much interest you pay on any kind of loan that you've taken. But what Dr. Aruna Sharma was saying, it's not just that CPI is above 6%. It's not just that this month WPI was 14.5%. Remember, this is in comparison to last month or last year. So when we say 14.55%, we are looking at a base of last year, this time period, when the WPI index was already very high, over 7%. On that, this further price hike is coming. So we are saying that prices are going up and up and up, and now at a faster pace as well, which is why it becomes a problem. I actually found a very interesting article, to give us a sense of how inflation has moved over time. Now, I'm not just going to talk about or give you a sense of what's happened just in the last 1 year, but say in the last 8 years. Since 2014, since the current government has been, but it's just been taken as a benchmark to give you a sense of how inflation has impacted your life. Chicken has become 94% more expensive now. Milk, a liter of milk costs you 40% more now than it did in 2014. Onions cost you 68% more now than you paid for 1 kg in 2014. Mustard oil costs almost double, 96% price rise has actually happened for mustard oil since 2014. Even other expenditures, for example, your medical expenditures, hospital charges have actually gone up 72% in the last 8 years. House rents have gone up 46% in the last 8 years, and this is after the drop that you actually saw during the pandemic in many of the big cities. Obviously, from city to city, the statistic will differ. Television sets cost you more than 57% than what they did in 2014. These are actually a list of things the Times of India collated together in a special report, analysis report that they made of all things that cost you more than petrol does today than it did in 2014. Add to that, the cost of petrol going up, lot other things are so much more expensive as well. That's the situation we are looking at. Will it get any better, Dr. Aruna Sharma, this year, or should we brace up for more price hikes?
It's a beautiful article with taking a data over a decade period, and you see that today, if we blame to the Russia-Ukraine war or to COVID, we had this uptrend even before that. So the inflation was going beyond the control systems even before that, and therefore it is going to escalate more and more in the coming years. Like I mentioned before, if the wholesale price index continues, then definitely your consumer price index will continue to escalate in the coming days. And worst thing is that on one hand, the prices have gone up ranging from 80 to 95%, what you were mentioning, or 96% you were mentioning. Equally worst is many people have lost jobs, many people have suffered the salary cuts, their living stature has come down, unemployment rates have increased. So in the sense, your incomes have gone down, but for your survival, what you have to spend, even on the essentials, the prices are skyrocketing. So it's like being the citizens of the country are getting pressurized from these two ends, that their income levels is on the slide, their consumption, their out-of-pocket spending is becoming more and more, even for the subsistence or sustainable levels of survival. Not to talk about the luxury goods, not to talk about non-essential. So in the sense, it will reflect again into lesser and lesser demand, and therefore lesser and lesser production, and therefore lesser and lesser opportunities for employment. For what we thought youth, young India, 65% to be an asset, with this kind of a scenario today, it is turning into a liability. So curtailing that is very important by adopting the different measures. Otherwise, we are going to battle it out for coming couple of years. It is going to hit us very, very badly.
Yes, so while there is a usual inflation that we see as we go along year after year, prices do go up, and it's okay as long as our salaries are going up, our wages are going up, our spending, our capacity is going up. So, if something costs me more is all right as long as I am earning more and I'm able to equally spend that much more money on buying the same product. As long as that happens, which is the usual course of times, it's okay. But when the inflation is way above of how my income is going up, it becomes a problem. Now, usually, Dr. Aruna Sharma, we are told that for growing economies, for developing economies like ours, some amount of inflation will always be there. If you look at several of the developed countries, they have 1%, 2% inflation, and for them, that's a big deal. But for us, we've largely seen 3%, 5%. RBI says up to 6%, we're okay with it. Why is that? Is it because when you're seeing tremendous growth, then comes along with it inflation, but right now we are not seeing growth and we are seeing inflation?
See, it goes like this, that inflation is good in the sense exactly the way the deficit budget is said to be good. It triggers you to perform better. So they say that when inflation is there, the demand will increase. More the demand, then more the opportunities, more the innovations, more the betterment. That is what will happen. And therefore, a cap of 6% is thought of because till 6% it is good. It is that flashpoint you can talk about it. But beyond that it goes, it is having all the negative impact that we all are witnessing today. Having said that, this is adjusted by the RBI by some short-term interest rates or increase the cash reserve ratios, right? And this is how they try to function. And you have seen that RBI decided not to touch upon the repo rates or the interest rates regime. But surprisingly, this is the first time we have seen the State Bank of India, which is the biggest bank of the country, they have gone ahead independent of RBI. So you have seen that SBI has increased even without touching it by 10 basis points, 10 BPS, which is commonly said to talked about it last week. Bank of Baroda has done it. Others will follow. So this is going to have an impact on your borrowings becoming expensive. Then your savings, you may get a better interest rates than what is offered today, but then you will be spending, because of high inflation, more on savings than on spending, and any economy which people don't spend, don't have a demand, is a negative factor. It is not adding to the growth, it is not adding to the manufacture, it is not adding to the services, and if that happens, then definitely we are heading to a more and more getting entrapped into this kind of a vicious cycle.
What can be done to give relief to the Aam Aadmi then? That's the question that everybody is asking, and you and I both agree that things will probably get a lot worse before they get better for us in terms of prices. What can the government do, the central bank do at this point?
You have said it absolutely right, because by my understanding, I am very, very clear in mind that every country should understand and go to the drawing table and should not go on the theoretical approach to the economics. It is very, very important that there are external factors which are beyond the control, which is triggering inflation. But then there are internal factors where the fuel price is the most critical thing. Because when you increase the fuel price, your transport increase, then everything that is transported, that becomes more expensive. Then it is used for pump irrigation and everything, the input cost goes up. So fuel is something, one trigger point, which multiplies its inflation rates as it moves ahead. And if you look at the fuel prices at what we are getting today at maybe $120 per barrel, even then on top of that, our taxation is very, very high. And it is not going to be a loss of money for the government, because even if we reduce the taxation, it may trigger us to break the vicious cycle. go for a virtuous cycle when we are moving ahead, which will generate more GST, more employment, more businesses, more demand, more investments. So therefore, it is very, very important that what is needed at this moment of time in the economy is to start off that virtuous cycle by breaking this vicious cycle. And one point I can loudly think of, and I think will have the biggest impact, is to cut down on taxation. The overall government revenue in coming 1.5 to 2 years will be much more, even if we are doing upon it, because it is going to trigger the economy and a growth rate which India badly needs, and therefore curtail the inflation. And so in a sense, you are achieving a twin goal of GDP growth. You are achieving a growth of triggering the economy and creating employment, and automatically it results in curtailing the inflation, what we are discussing today.
Well, let's hope that happens and we get some kind of relief. By the way, as we talk, prices of more and more categories are beginning to become a concern. And not all of this is the usual inflation that we talk about, or the cause is just that. But as prices go up further and further, it will overall have a negative impact on our lives. Wheat, for example, now prices have gone up by 5 to 7% just in the last few days, as there are concerns about the current heat and temperatures impacting the production. There are obviously concerns about the global supply of wheat as well that has gone on because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Metals are more expensive, gas is more expensive, oil is more expensive, food is more expensive, and all of that means that life becomes a little more difficult for the common man, something that the government and the central bank, not just in our country but in every other country, is looking at right now. How quickly we move to solve that problem, that remains to be seen. Thank you so much for taking all of our questions and really helping us simplify this very scary, complicated word inflation, WPI and CPI as well for us. Thank you, Dr. Aruna Sharma, for joining us. I hope this was a helpful session for all of you viewers as well. Thank you for joining me here on Simplified with me, Tanvi Shukla.